Here are your AARP top tips for growing veggies in pots and other containers. If you want to grow veggies at home, a container garden is a great option. Perfect for balconies and patios, potted veggies can be high yield and low maintenance. Here are 5 tips for growing healthy veggies in pots. Choose container-friendly plants. Compact, high-output tomatoes like patio and cherry varieties are great choices. Hot peppers also grow well in pots and can be bountiful. Salad greens grow quickly from seeds, and you can harvest tender leaves multiple times each season. Check your seed packets or a plant growing guide to find out when to plant based on where you live. Big pots are best. Larger plants need plenty of space for their roots and their fruits to grow. Containers should be at least 12 inches across for many plants. Make sure the pot has drainage holes in the bottom so your plant's roots don't mold. And use a quick-draining, soilless potting mix. Garden soil is too dense for pots. Sunlight and water are key. Most vegetables need at least 6 hours of sunlight per day. Place tomatoes and peppers in direct sun. Greens can handle part shade, especially in hot climates. Water evenly and regularly in the heat of summer. Some plants need water once or twice per day. A good test is to feel the soil about an inch below the surface. If it's dry, give your plants a drink. Support your plants. Taller plants like tomatoes and bell peppers need supports to stay upright. Sturdy tomato cages work well. Put them in place when you plant to avoid damaging the leaves. Garden stakes and wire ties can help support your peppers. Feed your plants. Potted veggies soak up the soil's nutrients. Use natural additives to keep your plants chemical-free. Liquid kelp and organic slow-release fertilizers are great veggie food. Follow instructions for your specific veggies and don't overfeed. Enjoy your delicious homegrown veggies. For more tips for your home, go to aarp.org/home-family.
Hello, my name is Teresa Collins. I am an Executive Council member from AARP. AARP, a nonprofit, nonpartisan member organization, has been working to promote the health and well-being of older Americans for more than 60 years. AARP Illinois is proud to represent all 50 plus in Illinois and our 1.7 million members, and we thank you for the opportunity to be your wise friend and fierce defender. Our mission is to enhance the quality of life for all as we age, leading positive social change and delivering value to members through advocacy, service, and information. Did you know studies show gardening is considered exercise, with benefits that may include everything from stronger hands to healthier hearts and longer lives? One study found lower rates of stroke, heart attack, and early death among older gardeners, regardless of their other exercise habits. Gardening also can be a boon for the mind and a way to connect with other people. So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's educational virtual event.
Hi, my name is Gordon Voumard. I run the farm here at Schoolhouse Acres at Senior Services Plus in Alton, Illinois. We grow a lot of produce here that we hope to give out to seniors who participate in our Meals on Wheels program. And today I'd just like to talk to you a little bit about how simple farming really is. It's very easy to look at what's going on at, perhaps a larger field more than what I have here in our high tunnel, and it might seem a little bit complicated, right? How do you just put something in the ground and have a lot of green come up? But there are a few things, a few tricks of the trade, I suppose. But for the most part, farming is, as the adage goes, you reap what you sow. It's as simple as it can get. So if we would like to take a walk in here into the high tunnel, so you can take a look at something in here, and it can seem like a lot of planning, a lot of intricate steps must go into starting something like this. The reality is that it's fairly simple. There are a few steps that might not seem to intuitive, I suppose. But whenever I start a season, the first thing I want to do is I want to know exactly what the temperatures are going to be like in the area. So you can check, the USDA has a lot of information about plant hardiness zones. Here in Alton, we're in zone 6A. Moving down from Northern America, you go from 3 to, and I cannot remember exactly what the numbers are lower down, but you move from 3 and keep getting into higher and higher numbers as you go further south. And that essentially just tells you how cold it gets in the area, the lowest temperatures it will get to. And knowing that, you can then check the almanac and see your last frost date. And that is when a lot of your crops will be going into the ground. And that's what you need to know right off the bat, because that will let you know when you need to be doing, if you do any starts in a nursery, or if you do any starts just in your basement, wherever you can, in a windowsill. This will let you know when to put them in. And if you look at the back of any seed packet, you will see a little bit of information about start these so long before the last frost, or so long before the soil temperature reaches a certain amount. In general, last frost is what you need to worry about. So on the back of a seed packet, it will say something along the lines of after the threat of last frost, or after the threat of frost has passed. That's just referring to your last frost date. Cucumbers tend to go into the ground a little bit later because they're a bit warmer crop. They turn into something like this over here. In general, I find it's not too important to know specifically. Like if you were to look at this and not know, oh, it's a cucumber. For the life of me, I can look at all kinds of crops and not know what they are immediately. I almost wouldn't recognize the potatoes at the end of the row, and I grow potatoes every year. It can be hard to tell, and that's not the important part. The important part is, in agriculture, what you put in is what you're going to get out. It's the maximum amount at the very least. So in our nursery here, whenever we have our sides down and proper plastic on the sides, this is where we would winter our crops over. Sorry, this is where we would put our crops in over winter, where to keep them warm. We have some heaters and everything. But also, whenever last frost is approaching, whenever we know we need to put our seeds into either a seed tray or a starch pot, this is where we do it, where we can keep it a little bit more warm, have a little bit more control over the environment. But this can work just as well in a basement with a grow light, or in a windowsill, anywhere where you have the ability to control the environment a little bit, but still have access to some kind of sunlight, or again, a grow light. It's not really worth worrying too much about. People talk about the specific colors of grow lights and the amount of lumens they put out. In my experience, it doesn't matter. Whenever you get into very specific, growing very specific things, it can, I suppose. Hydroponics need specific types of lights. Specific crops only do well with certain types of lights. But if you're doing starts, if it says grow light on it, it's going to work. And all you would do to start any kind of crop, obviously we have no starts in here at this point, but all you would do is put a little bit of potting soil. Any generic brand would do, but you also could just pull some soil from outside and add a little bit of compost or something if you have it. Otherwise, just some generic potting soil from any store nearby will serve you well. And you just put it into either a seed tray. This would be used for something where they're not going to be particularly large. You'll plant them very soon after you start them. So something like radishes. If you're going to start radishes, which you absolutely can, it's a little bit strange for radishes, but you absolutely can. You start them in something like this because they grow very quickly. And that's, again, something that you can find on the back of any seed pack. Is the days to harvest is normally how it's said. That's just going to tell you how long it'll be after planting that you'll be able to harvest it. And that tells you pretty clearly, it's a very small amount of days, something like 50 days, then you don't need to use something like this, where this is for something that you start and it would stay in the spot for a lot longer. This would also be used for slightly warmer crops, like cucumbers or like tomatoes. Those would stay in something like this for a significant amount of time, which is why you use a slightly larger pot so that the roots can have a little bit more space to grow. But regardless of the medium of how you start your crops, if you do starts, important things to remember are they still need water, but they need drastically less than you might think something in actual soil does. A few drops every day is usually enough, unless it's in something in a plant in a pot like this that's very large. It's not going to need an incredible amount of water, because there's really nowhere for the moisture to go at this point. There are a lot of types of potting soil, and some of them prioritize certain things, but for the most part, you'll see something that you likely associate with healthy garden beds. The little white clumps in potting soil, that's called vermiculite. Not important to know, but essentially, whenever you see something like that, what that tends to help with is moisture retention. It helps with a variety of things, but what you're looking for is something that can retain moisture fairly well. Again, that's on the topic of you don't need an incredible amount of moisture for these things. Sorry, whenever I have things indoors in summer, that's when you want a south-facing window, because that's where the sun's going to be. But in winter, in this area specifically, it's going to be almost exactly overhead. A lot of seeds will have something on the back of their packet planned for starting outdoors. We'll have something that discusses how long before, but you often might want. You often might want to think about it a little bit yourself. If it happens to be something that's going to take a very long time to harvest, such as like 75 days to harvest, and on the back it says, you need it out after 4 weeks. Sow them 4 weeks before you plan to transplant them. It's probably not an ideal situation. Warm crops especially tend to need a lot of time. In general, I do most of my starts either a month or 2 months before the last frost date, and the warmer crops I would do earlier. As long as you can control the temperature and wherever you're starting them, I would start them earlier. And all that's going to accomplish is mean that whenever you put them out in the ground, you have a bit of a head start on the season. All of this was sown right into the ground, and we're in, mid to late May at this point, right? So you could be doing a lot better than I am here if you had a lot of starts prepared. So out here, I've got a variety of lettuce, actually, but only a few of the lettuce plants have actually come up. These were sown 2.5 weeks ago. Yes, 2.5 weeks ago. These were sown about 2.5 weeks ago. These cucumbers were sown, oh goodness. It's been 3 weeks since the cucumbers were sown here. I have some cabbage grown and sown in this row. It hasn't come up very well. Something important to note is that if you get cold crops out too late, they won't make it. It's not just about the amount of sunlight they're getting, it is about the heat as well. So some of this lettuce has been a little bit unhealthy as well because it's also a cold crop. Back here I have some peas, which are just getting ready to trellis. So whenever you have something that grows up, such as peas or pole beans or something like that, something that will vine. The cucumbers are a good example as well. Something that will vine and grow up something. You need to trellis it somehow. So I'll be putting a variety of posts out here for the peas to grow up. I have peppers in 2 different rows. I'm going to have to re-sow them. We had a little bit of an issue with flooding in the high tunnel here. These were started 2.5 weeks ago. The peppers were started 3 weeks ago. Then along each edge of the high tunnel, I have several mounds of tomatoes. These were also started 3 weeks ago out here. They're sown specifically out here 3 weeks ago. And whenever you're sowing something that is going into a mound instead of a row, what you will tend to do is place a cluster of seeds. And again, this is on the back of every seed packet as well. Typically, every seed packet is going to tell you everything you need to know to sow the seed itself. But with tomatoes and other things such as peppers, where you would consider putting them into a mound, something that you don't want to grow very close to something else. Lettuce can grow right next to another lettuce plant, but tomatoes, if you had 2 right next to each other, they need a lot of space, right? So there's no point. But you would still sow a lot of seeds into each mound because you're essentially just giving yourself the best odds of one of them managing to sprout. And then you would do something called thinning, where essentially you just pluck out everything but the largest plant once it's grown up enough. And I can go ahead and do a little bit of that now, where I'm just plucking the tomato plants that are smaller and least likely to make it. If you don't do that, then they will just, their roots will take up too much space. They'll compete with each other, and then it's likely that all of the plants in the mound will die. Then the last thing I have are my potatoes all the way back here. I'm partially through weeding all of my rows, but this back row here is a very good indication of where tomatoes should be ideally in all honesty, early May is when you want your tomato plants, potato plants to look like this. Potatoes are a bit of a different one. You sow them differently. You use whole potatoes and you cut the eyes off them to sow them. And these are sown, actually, oh, holy cow. I have potato flower coming up. These are sown, the ideal date is immediately after St. Patrick's Day. These are all rows of potatoes. Like I said, I'm only partially through weeding all of the rows. And it can be disheartening. I sowed all of these rows exactly the same as all the others, so there should be a full row of potato plants coming up, and it's not always going to work out perfectly. That's just a reality of agriculture. You can know exactly what you're doing. It's not always going to work out. In fact, you can do this at home. This is fun to try at home, even if you don't plan to actually sow the potatoes. If you take any potato that you have and place it in water, ideally you want to place one end of it in water. What I've seen people do is put toothpicks into the other side to suspend it over like a mason jar. Just have the very end of it sitting in some water and leave that it can take months at that point. But you're just going to sit it there and watch for any kind of growth that takes off the potato. It'll be a little bit of it's essentially just a little bit of a nub that starts growing off of a certain area. That's where you have an eye of a potato. And the more of those you have on a seed potato, the more times you can split it. Essentially, the eye itself is the seed, and you can have multiple on a potato. And then you just cut off a section along with each seed. Really, ideally, you're only going to get 4, maybe 5 off of a single seed potato if you're lucky. But regardless, it's a pretty cool thing you can try just to actually get the bud to grow. Come with me and we can come take a look at the raised beds out here. So out here in the raised beds, we have a few different examples of how agriculture can be, or your farm or your raised beds, or even just a field can be continued from one year to the other without needing to do any kind of starts or sowing directly. Here we have garlic. This is something that would be sown in the fall and harvested in not the following spring, but the spring after. So this garlic will stay in the ground for over a year, in fact, a year and a half, to grow to its full size. Here we have a bunch of oregano. This I didn't sow. This volunteered, which is just referring to something that wasn't intentionally sown. This grew here not last year, but the year before, and it's just different bundles of the oregano have apparently stayed under the soil for long enough, or the seeds themselves have stayed under the soil for long enough that they survived until this spring and just sprouted on their own. You'll see that mostly with herbs. This is just waste of the onions thrown away. I apologize. And here we have a variety of onions, and these are just their seed pods are starting to split. And each of these bulbs, in the life cycle of an onion, what you would do is plant these seed bulbs. They're just essentially just other onions. You plant them in the ground, and that would be what grows into a full onion plant like what you see here. And then the bulbs underground would stay there for however long you'd like them. There's a lot of talk about leaving them in the ground will make them slightly more, I wouldn't call it spicy, but the sulfur taste that you get from an onion. Leaving them in the ground can, depending on the soil concentration, the sulfur concentration in the soil can mean that they'll get a little bit, again, spicier. But you leave them in the ground until they're as large as you want them to be. Normally, I find that takes about as long as a garlic, about a year and a half. You'd plant them in the fall, and you'd harvest them in not the following spring, but the spring after. So these will be harvested in the spring of 2024. So this is a different type of propagation, right? With a lot of plants, you would that you put in the ground, such as the potatoes. You pull it out of the ground, and that thing itself would either grow the seeds or it would be the seed. The seed bulbs themselves are actually more of the plant itself. These, if you gave them enough time, they would grow not very large, but just large enough that you might be able to grind them up into some kind of onion powder. So slightly different ways that things can work. These are what you would call either spring or winter onions. These have all been sown. As a matter of fact, right here, it's easy to see. This is an example of how quickly radishes grow. These were sown less than a week ago. These were sown last Friday. It's currently Thursday, so I mean, it's been 6 days since these radishes were sown, and they're already popping up. And there are a couple of beds that have them going on. That one's actually shows them a lot better, but radishes grow incredibly quickly. They're popular to get out even before you might put out your potatoes, because that means you can have produce coming out of the ground almost immediately. As soon as, some of your warmer stuff might be going into the ground at the same time you're taking radishes out. Obviously, I've gotten these in here a little bit late. I find it, for the purposes of giving things to Meals on Wheels or running a market, it's better to have everything out of the ground at the same time. But absolutely an option. They tend to tolerate colder climates a little bit more. My understanding of the idea is this will all, some of it will end up going to Meals on Wheels, maybe not something that's specifically in this bed specifically. May end up going to Meals on Wheels, but most of this will be sold at market, and then the revenue will either go back into the farm or to Meals on Wheels. I'm uncertain about where it goes particularly. We have more volunteer lettuce right over here. Again, an example of, I didn't sow it myself this year. It's just started to come up. Oh my goodness. All of this lettuce was just started to sprout on its own, and I allowed it to, because why would you say no to a sure start? Sometimes volunteers can be problematic crop volunteers can be a little bit problematic if you have something volunteering where you don't want it to grow. For instance, I've never had this happen, but if you had corn that you grew in a certain area one year, and then it started to volunteer in the same spot the next year, that could be problematic. Corn itself draws a lot of nitrogen from the soil, so you don't want to grow in the same spot 2 years in a row. Whenever you look at the nutrients that crops need, you tend to see the big three. If you look at any fertilizer bottle, you'll see a number dash number dash number, or it could be referred to as the NPK number, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Essentially, every crop needs a different amount of these nutrients. You can look it up. It's a little bit difficult to find specific numbers on what things need. But especially in Illinois, we know corn likes nitrogen, which is why you'll have the normal cycle of 3 years of corn for 1 year of beans in like commercial farms. I'm not sure if that's as well known as I'm pretending it is. But corn is probably, it needs almost specifically nitrogen, very little of anything else. Different crops such as lettuce will tolerate just about any amount of nutrients in the ground. Obviously you need some, but it's not very picky. But then you have things like beans, which are, there's a reason that you plant them in between your corn years. And actually there are bean plants right over here. There's one here, one sprouting, but then these are my, these look more like bean plants. These are bush beans specifically. Beans are a type of crop that will replenish the nitrogen in the soil. Whenever you think of how your crops have been drawing a lot of nutrients from the soil, it can get very difficult to parse. And sorry, that's very difficult to understand how to fix the problem, right? You have no nitrogen in your soil. What do? Beans, in fact, any kind of legumes, my peas will do the same thing, are something that will replenish nitrogen back into the soil. There are other ways to do this. A lot of farms that also have cattle will use manure, although that can cause a phosphorus issue. A lot of farms will use compost. We have a compost pile here as well, where we throw all of our waste. As that all breaks down, you end up with a lot more nitrogen in it. And another big one is something called a fallow year. I'm not sure how often people use that term anymore. But it's essentially just a year where a field that you would normally cultivate, you don't cultivate. You could also grow something over it, some kind of cover crop, just to till into the soil after the year is done. But essentially a fallow year is just, you don't cultivate a year, but you don't cultivate a field whenever you normally would. We can go take a look at what the compost looks like here at Schoolhouse Acres. So you can see a large brush pile. This is pre-compost, so this all will be broken down. sticks and logs and large bits of more rough material, right? So wood specifically. It's difficult to break down in compost. So we sit this all in a pile, and as soon as we have the time, which is a commodity, we will break all of this down and put it into our compost pile. Whenever composting, in general, people talk about the different ways that you can make sure that the amount of green to brown manure is correct. Green manure meaning something that has a large amount of nitrogen, and brown manure being something that's has a large amount of carbon. With compost, you tend to want to have that at a certain level. I won't get into the details of all of that, but if you happen to have a lot of grass clippings from mowing a lawn, or and dead leaves, again, lawn care, if you put them in about equal amounts, you'll get very close in this area, in the Illinois area, to a perfect ratio. And then composting can be as simple as just leaving it in a pile. There are different versions of composting. You can do vermicomposting, so composting with worms. You can have an in-vessel composter, where you may have seen cylinders where people just throw all of their kitchen waste into. That's an in-vessel composter. And then there's also aerated static pile composting. Very complicated term. It just means something like this, but with vents underneath it to manage the amount of airflow. So if you're following along, at this point you would have something started, and you're just waiting to put it into the ground. And this is when you need to start thinking about where you're going to put it into the ground, or if you are going to put it into the ground. There are several options, right? You've seen a couple here, perhaps, where we have some crops that are directly into the ground in our high tunnel. We have some crops that are in raised beds, where we have a little bit of control. So it's not just in the ground outdoors. So we can control a little bit about the pests going into the raised beds themselves. But that's not all of your options either. You can always if you just have a balcony, you could put a plant in a pot. As simple as that. And at that point, you only need to worry about how much sunlight the plant is getting. Again, on the back of seed packs, you'll often see something talking about the amount of sunlight that something needs, and it will then often give you a number of hours of sunlight per day. It's never going to be exact, but it gives you an idea of whether or not it should be out in the middle of a field with absolutely no shade, or if it should be more under a tree or something. Or, in a high tunnel where you can control the shade a little bit. So by looking at your plants, knowing what you're going to have, you can sometimes tell what will be the most effective option for your plant specifically. But in general, you can grow anything in any of these mediums. There are some exceptions, but it's just whatever works best for you. Agriculture could be something that you do on a large field if you have property, or it could be something you do just in a windowsill if that's all you have. Whenever you go to plant something to transplant specifically a start into soil, or if at this point you don't have starts and you just want to sow something directly in the soil, maybe you got too late in the season like it did for me, and I didn't want to continue to do my starts whenever I could just sow it directly into the soil. At that point, you need to start worrying about actually preparing your soil. If you're making a new field, or if you're clearing up one that's been overgrown, it can be as simple as just weeding. And then if you have a tiller tilling through it, or running a hoe through it, anything to loosen up the topsoil, and then create a row to sow things into, or a mound, whatever you feel will work best for you. Sometimes it's just a matter of preference. And if you feel something will work best for you, but it doesn't, now you know. A lot of agriculture ends up being trial and error. Even whenever you know everything you're doing. I've been farming a very long time. I've been farming since I was a kid, and I've made mistakes, right? Not every bit of soil is different. Every farm is going to be different. So you're going to make mistakes, and that's how you learn how to do it better. Thank you for joining. Again, my name's Gordon Voumard. I've been here at Schoolhouse Acres at Senior Services Plus in Alton. And I hope you'll join us another time.